Hi, I'm Emma. Last month at my sister's bridal shower, she stood up in front of 30 women and announced that I was 26, chronically single, and should probably accept that some people just aren't meant for love. 2 weeks later, at her wedding reception, my boyfriend of 2 years dropped to one knee on the dance floor and asked me to marry him while she watched in complete shock from the head table. What she didn't know was that Ryan had been planning this proposal for months, and her cruel words only made the moment even sweeter. This isn't just about a surprise engagement. It's about what happens when family tries to write your story for you, and you decide to write your own ending instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Chen, and I'm 26 years old, living in Austin, Texas, where I work as a senior graphic designer for a boutique marketing agency. I've always been the creative one in my family, the dreamer who chose art school over business school, who moved to the big city instead of staying in our small hometown of Cedar Falls. My sister Caroline is 28, 2 years older, and has followed what my mom calls the traditional path: college degree in education, teaching job at the local elementary school, engagement to her high school sweetheart after 6 years of dating, and now planning the perfect small-town wedding that our entire extended family has been anticipating for months. Growing up, Caroline and I were inseparable despite our differences. She was the responsible older sister who made sure I did my homework and didn't stay out too late, while I was the one who convinced her to sneak out for midnight ice cream runs and helped her write love letters to boys she had crushes on. We shared a bedroom until I was 14, staying up late whispering about our dreams and fears. Caroline always said she wanted to get married young and have 3 kids before she turned 30. I said I wanted to travel the world and maybe fall in love with an artist in Paris. We used to laugh about how different we were, but we promised each other that no matter what, we'd always be each other's best friend and biggest supporter. That dynamic started shifting when I left for college in Austin. At first, Caroline was supportive, even a little envious of my independence. But as the years went by and I started building a life in the city while she stayed in Cedar Falls, something changed. Our phone calls became less frequent and more strained. When I'd visit home, she'd make little comments about my apartment being too expensive, my job being unstable compared to teaching, my dating life being chaotic because I wasn't settling down with the first decent guy I met. I started to feel like she saw my choices as a rejection of everything she valued, and maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. The breaking point came 2 months ago when I received Caroline's bridal shower invitation in the mail. It was beautiful, elegant cream cardstock with rose gold lettering, clearly expensive and carefully designed. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't personalized at all. My name was handwritten on a generic invitation, and there was no personal note inside. No excitement about celebrating together. Nothing that acknowledged our relationship beyond the basic family obligation. When I called to RSVP and asked if I could help with planning, Caroline seemed surprised that I wanted to be involved. She told me everything was already handled by her maid of honor and future mother-in-law, that I should just show up and enjoy myself like any other guest. I should have recognized the warning signs then, but I convinced myself that Caroline was just stressed about the wedding and didn't mean to exclude me. I bought her a gorgeous silk pajama set from her registry, something I knew she'd love because we used to talk about having matching pajamas for our future bridal parties. I took the day off work and drove the 3 hours from Austin to Cedar Falls, genuinely excited to celebrate my sister and hopefully reconnect with her during this special time in her life. The shower was held at our childhood home, in the backyard, where Caroline and I used to put on elaborate plays for our parents and host tea parties for our stuffed animals. Mom had transformed the space with beautiful decorations, white and blush pink flowers everywhere, elegant table settings, and a gorgeous backdrop for photos that looked like something out of a magazine. About 30 women were there, mostly Caroline's college friends from her sorority, her fellow teachers, and women from our extended family. I recognized most faces, but I quickly realized I was one of the few people there who came alone. Everyone else seemed to be paired up or in groups, chatting comfortably about shared memories and inside jokes. Caroline looked absolutely radiant in a flowing white sundress and delicate flower crown, every inch the perfect bride-to-be. When she spotted me across the yard, she waved me over to the gift table where she was holding court with her bridesmaids. Her introduction made my stomach drop just a little. She announced to the group that I was her baby sister from the big city, emphasizing the words in a way that made it sound like I was playing dress-up rather than actually living an adult life. When someone asked what I did for work, Caroline jumped in before I could answer, saying I did some kind of computer design stuff, and then quickly changed the subject to talk about her honeymoon plans. The gift opening session was where I first noticed how differently Caroline treated me compared to her other guests. Each present came with a story, a memory, an expression of genuine gratitude and connection. When her sorority sister gave her a cookbook, Caroline gushed about their cooking disasters in college. When her future mother-in-law presented her with a family heirloom, Caroline teared up talking about feeling welcomed into their family. When she got to my carefully chosen pajama set, she held it up briefly, said it was nice and practical, and moved on to the next gift without any personal acknowledgement or story. I felt like I was watching someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had edited me out of her narrative so completely that even my thoughtful gifts had no meaning. During the party games, the distance between us became even more apparent. We played Bridal Bingo, and I realized I didn't know many basic facts about Caroline's wedding plans that everyone else seemed familiar with. We did a quiz about the bride and groom, and I got several answers wrong about Caroline's preferences and dreams, not because we weren't close once, but because she'd never shared this information with me. The other women would laugh knowingly at inside jokes and references that went completely over my head. I started to feel like an outsider at my own sister's celebration, like I was watching her life through a window rather than being invited inside. The real turning point came during lunch when Caroline's maid of honor, her college roommate Jessica, stood up to give a toast. Jessica talked about Caroline's incredible journey to find her perfect match, and how she'd always been so wise about love, even back in college. She mentioned how Caroline had helped so many friends navigate their relationships with her amazing advice, and how she was like a love guru who always knew when someone had found their person. As I listened to this speech, I couldn't help but think about how Caroline had never once offered me genuine dating advice or emotional support about my relationships. Instead, she'd consistently criticized every man I'd brought home to meet the family, finding fault with each one and making it clear that she didn't think any of my relationships were serious or worthwhile. When I dated Marcus during my senior year of college, Caroline said he was too artsy and impractical for long-term potential. When I was with Jake after graduation, she dismissed him as just a phase because he worked in restaurants while pursuing his music career. Even with my current boyfriend Ryan, whom I'd been with for almost 2 years, Caroline had barely made an effort to get to know him during the few times they'd met. She'd politely answered his questions, but never asked him anything about himself, never showed interest in our relationship, never acknowledged that this might be something serious and lasting. Sitting there listening to Jessica's toast, I realized that Caroline hadn't just been dismissive of my romantic life. She'd actively written me out of the love story category entirely. In her mind, she was the sister who understood relationships, who gave good advice, who was destined for happily ever after. I was the career-focused sister, the one who was good at creative things but couldn't quite figure out the relationship piece. She'd assigned us these roles so completely that she couldn't even see evidence that contradicted her narrative. The moment that changed everything happened during the final game of the shower. Caroline's future mother-in-law had organized a predictions for the bride activity where everyone had to guess things about Caroline's future. How many children she'd have, where she and Tom would live in 10 years, what she'd name her first pet. The questions were sweet and hopeful, and Everyone was laughing and making playful guesses. Then Caroline decided to turn the spotlight on me. She announced to the group that we should make predictions about when I would finally settle down and find someone. The way she said it made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. She continued, saying that I was 26 and still single, bouncing from relationship to relationship without ever making anything stick. She suggested that maybe we should focus on more realistic predictions for me, like when I might get my next promotion or buy my first house, because obviously career success was more my speed than romantic success. The group laughed, but it wasn't entirely comfortable laughter. Some of the older women looked a bit shocked by Caroline's bluntness, but the younger ones, her college friends who didn't really know me, seemed to think it was all in good fun. That's when something inside me snapped. Not into anger, exactly, but into clarity. I stood up from my seat at the edge of the group, my heart pounding but my voice surprisingly steady. I looked directly at Caroline and said that actually, I wasn't single at all. I told the group that I'd been in a committed relationship with Ryan for nearly 2 years, longer than some of their marriages had lasted. I explained that Caroline would know this if she'd ever bothered to ask about my life instead of making assumptions based on her own limited understanding of what my world looked like. Caroline's perfect hostess smile faltered for the first time all day. She tried to backtrack, saying she knew I had a boyfriend but nothing serious like what Tom and I have. That's when I really found my voice. I asked her how she could possibly know what was serious when she'd never once asked me about Ryan beyond basic politeness during his brief visit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's to Cedar Falls. I told her she didn't know that Ryan and I had been talking about moving in together, that we'd already met each other's friends and co-workers, that we'd been to 4 weddings together in the past year, and were starting to talk about our own future. The backyard had gone completely silent, except for the sound of birds chirping and a neighbor's lawnmower in the distance. Caroline's face was turning red, and she kept glancing around at her guests as if looking for support or a way to change the subject. She finally said that this was her bridal shower and maybe we could have this conversation later in private. I told her there was nothing private about the way she'd just humiliated me in front of 30 people, and there was nothing private about the way she'd been dismissing my life choices for years. I didn't storm out dramatically or cause a huge scene. Instead, I calmly finished my glass of lemonade, said goodbye to my mom and a few relatives, and walked to my car with as much dignity as I could manage. The drive back to Austin felt like the longest 3 hours of my life, but also like I was driving toward something better, something more authentic than the family dynamics I'd been accepting for too long. When I got home, Ryan was in our kitchen, making dinner, humming along to music playing from his phone. He looked up when I walked in, immediately recognizing from my expression that something had happened. Instead of bombarding me with questions, he just wrapped me in a hug and let me tell him everything at my own pace. He listened without trying to fix the situation or make excuses for Caroline's behavior. When I finished talking, he said he was proud of me for standing up for myself and for defending our relationship. That night, as we sat on our couch sharing takeout Thai food and watching terrible reality TV, I felt more loved and supported than I had in any of my childhood memories with Caroline. 2 weeks later, at Caroline's wedding reception, everything changed in the most beautiful way possible. The ceremony had been lovely. Caroline looked absolutely stunning, and Tom seemed genuinely happy and devoted to her. During the reception, I was actually having a good time, dancing with cousins I hadn't seen in years and enjoying the open bar and delicious food. Caroline and I had barely spoken since the shower incident, but we'd managed to be civil during the wedding weekend for the sake of family harmony. Then Ryan asked me to dance during a slow song, and something felt different about the way he was holding me. Halfway through the song, he stepped back, got down on one knee right there on the dance floor, and pulled out the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. The entire reception stopped what they were doing to watch as Ryan asked me to marry him with tears in his eyes and love in his voice. Through my own tears, I could see Caroline at the head table, her mouth literally hanging open in shock. After I said yes and Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, the dance floor erupted in cheers and applause. Even people who didn't know us well seemed genuinely happy and excited about the surprise proposal. Caroline eventually made her way over to congratulate us, but I could tell she was struggling to process what had just happened. Later, she pulled me aside and admitted that she had no idea Ryan was planning to propose, that she didn't realize we were that serious, that she might have misjudged our relationship entirely. Looking back now, 6 months later, and deep into planning my own wedding, I understand that Caroline's need to diminish my romantic life came from her own insecurity about being the successful sister in our family's eyes. She'd built her identity around being the one who had it all figured out, the one who followed the right path and made the right choices. My happiness and success in a different kind of life challenged that narrative in ways that made her uncomfortable. But I also learned something important about myself through this experience. I learned that I don't need anyone's permission or validation to live my life fully and love completely. Caroline's opinion of my relationship with Ryan was never actually about Ryan or about me. It was about her own need to feel superior and in control of our family's story. Once I stopped giving her that power over my self-worth, her words lost their ability to hurt me. Ryan and I are getting married next spring, and yes, Caroline is going to be my maid of honor despite everything that happened. Not because she's changed completely, but because I've changed. I've learned to set boundaries while still maintaining love for my family. I've learned that sometimes the people who should celebrate us the most are the ones who struggle the most with our success. And that's their issue to work through, not ours to fix. To everyone watching who has a family member who tries to write your story for you, remember that you hold the pen. Your love story, your career story, your happiness, none of it needs their approval to be real and meaningful. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who put the most conditions on that love. And it's okay to stop meeting those conditions if they require you to make yourself smaller. And to anyone who's ever been told they're not meant for love or success or happiness, you absolutely are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially the people who are supposed to want the best for you. Your story is still being written, and the best chapters might be the ones that surprise everyone, including yourself. Looking back at our childhood, Caroline and I couldn't have been more different, yet we were practically attached at the hip. She was born with this natural confidence that made adults gravitate toward her at family gatherings, while I was the shy kid hiding behind mom's legs until someone coaxed me out with promises of art supplies or books. Caroline excelled at everything. She touched without seeming to try very hard. She was captain of the cheerleading squad, homecoming queen, and graduated as valedictorian while maintaining what seemed like an effortless social life. Teachers loved her because she was respectful and responsible. Parents trusted her because she never got into trouble, and other kids wanted to be around her because she had this magnetic personality that made everyone feel special. I was the complete opposite in almost every way. While Caroline was performing at pep rallies, I was in the art room after school, covered in paint, and completely absorbed in whatever project had captured my imagination that week. I preferred reading to socializing, spent lunch periods in the library rather than the cafeteria, and felt most comfortable when I had a sketchbook in my hands. Where Caroline seemed to instinctively understand social dynamics and navigate them with ease, I struggled to make small talk and often said the wrong thing at the wrong time. I wasn't unpopular exactly, but I existed on the periphery of high school social life, content to observe rather than participate in most of the drama and excitement that seemed to consume my classmates. Despite our differences, or maybe because of them, Caroline and I developed an incredibly close bond growing up. She became my interpreter for the social world I found so confusing. explaining why certain kids acted the way they did, or helping me understand the unspoken rules of teenage interaction. When I had crushes on boys who seemed completely out of my league, Caroline would give me advice about how to talk to them or offer to find out if they were interested in me. She never made me feel weird or awkward for being different, and she genuinely seemed to appreciate my artistic talents and unique perspective on things. I was Caroline's creative consultant and emotional confidant in return. When she needed posters for student government campaigns, I would stay up late designing and painting them with elaborate decorations that always caught everyone's attention. When she had fights with friends or felt overwhelmed by the pressure to be perfect all the time, she would come to my room and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. I helped her write poetry for English class, designed invitations for parties she was planning, and listened to her practice speeches until she felt confident enough to deliver them in front of crowds. Our bedroom was our sanctuary, decorated with a mixture of Caroline's cheerleading trophies and academic awards, alongside my art projects and collections of vintage postcards. We had completely different bedtime routines and sleep schedules, but we developed this ritual of talking in. The dark afterlights were supposed to be out. Caroline would tell me about her day, sharing gossip and social observations that fascinated me because they gave me insight into a world I participated in but never fully understood. I would tell her about books I was reading, ideas for art, projects, or random thoughts about life that popped into my head. Some of my happiest childhood memories are of those late-night conversations where we felt like the only two people in the world who truly understood each other. When it came time for college decisions, our different paths became more apparent, but still felt complementary rather than competitive. Caroline chose State University, a large public school about 4 hours from home where she could study education and be part of a vibrant campus community. She joined a sorority, became involved in student organizations, and seemed to thrive in the busy social environment that would have overwhelmed me completely. I chose a smaller liberal arts college in Austin, known for its strong art program and creative community. It was farther from home, more expensive, and definitely not the practical choice our parents had hoped I would make. But Caroline supported my decision completely. She helped me pack for college, drove with our parents to move me into my dorm, and promised to visit as often as possible. During our first semester apart, we talked on the phone almost every night, sharing stories about our new experiences and maintaining the close connection we'd always had. Caroline told me about sorority rush, football games, and her education classes, while I described my art professors, the other students in my program, and the overwhelming creative energy of living in a city for the first time. We still felt like a team, just playing on different fields. The first signs of strain appeared during my sophomore year when I started becoming more independent and confident in my artistic identity. I had found my people in college, other creative students who understood my perspective and shared my passion for art and design. I was thriving academically, working on increasingly complex projects, and beginning to envision a career path that excited me. When I would talk to Caroline about my successes and future plans, she started making subtle comments about the impracticality of an art career, the financial instability of creative work, and the importance of having a backup plan. At first, I thought she was just being protective, looking out for my future security the way older sisters are supposed to do. But as time went on, her comments became more frequent and pointed. When I told her about a professor who had recommended me for a competitive internship, she asked what I would do if the art thing didn't work out. When I shared my excitement about moving to Austin permanently after graduation, she wondered aloud if I was making my life unnecessarily difficult by choosing such an expensive city. When I started dating fellow art students, she would ask pointed questions about their career prospects and financial stability. Caroline, meanwhile, was following what everyone in our family considered the ideal path. She was excelling in her education program, had maintained a steady relationship with Tom since her freshman year, and had clear, achievable goals that made sense to everyone around her. She would graduate with a teaching degree, get a job at the local elementary school, marry Tom after a reasonable courtship period, and eventually have children who would grow up in the same community where we had been raised. It was a beautiful, stable life plan that our parents were incredibly proud of, and that fit perfectly with the values our small town celebrated. The contrast between our choices became more pronounced as we approached graduation. Caroline's life was unfolding exactly as expected, with each milestone celebrated by our extended family and community. She received the Outstanding Student Teacher Award, got engaged to Tom in a romantic proposal that became the talk of Cedar Falls, and immediately began planning the wedding that everyone had been anticipating since they started dating. Her engagement announcement in the local newspaper included her photo, her accomplishments, and a detailed description of her wedding plans, treating her like a local celebrity. My achievements felt smaller and less comprehensible to most of our family members. When I graduated summa cum laude and was accepted into a prestigious graduate program, the celebration was more muted because no one really understood what my degree meant or what I planned to do with it. When I decided to skip graduate school and move directly to Austin to pursue freelance design work, the response was polite concern rather than excitement. When I started dating Ryan, a photographer I met through work, Caroline's first questions were about his financial stability and long-term prospects rather than whether he made me happy. Moving to Austin after college was both liberating and isolating in ways I hadn't expected. I loved the creative energy of the city, the diversity of people and perspectives, and the opportunity to build a career doing work that genuinely excited me. I found an apartment in a trendy neighborhood, started building a client base for my freelance graphic design business, and began establishing myself in the local creative community. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, surrounded by people who understood and appreciated my perspective. But the distance from Caroline and my family was more challenging than I had anticipated. Phone calls became less frequent as our lives diverged, and we had less in common to talk about. When I would visit home for holidays or family events, I felt like I was speaking a different language when I tried to describe my work or my life in the city. Caroline's life was concrete and relatable to everyone around her, while mine seemed abstract and uncertain, even though I was happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been. The shift in our relationship became undeniable during Caroline's engagement period. She was consumed with wedding planning, talking about flower arrangements, and venue selection with the kind of intensity I had once reserved for art projects. When she called me, it was usually to share details about wedding preparations or to ask for my creative input on invitations or decorations. I was happy to help and genuinely excited about her wedding, but I started to feel like our conversations had become very one-sided, focused entirely on her life while mine was barely acknowledged. When I would try to share news about my own life, Caroline's responses became increasingly dismissive or concerned rather than supportive. When I told her about landing a major client that would allow me to quit my part-time retail job and focus on design full-time, she asked what I would do if the client decided not to renew the contract. When I described the amazing apartment Ryan and I were considering moving into together, she worried about whether I was moving too fast in the relationship. When I shared my excitement about a gallery show that would feature some of my work, she suggested I might want to keep my day job just in case. These conversations left me feeling frustrated and misunderstood in ways that were difficult to articulate. Caroline wasn't being intentionally mean or unsupportive, but she seemed incapable of celebrating my successes without immediately focusing on potential problems or failures. It was as if she couldn't imagine that my unconventional choices might actually work out well for me, or perhaps she didn't want to imagine it because it would challenge her own assumptions about the right way to live. Ryan entered my life during this period of growing distance from my family, and he represented everything that felt right about my new life in Austin. He was talented, ambitious, and creative in ways that complemented my own artistic interests. He understood the challenges and rewards of building a career in a creative field because he was navigating similar territory as a freelance photographer. He supported my dreams without trying to manage my risks, and he seemed genuinely excited about the life we were building together, rather than worried about its unconventional aspects. Our relationship developed naturally and intensely over the course of nearly 2 years. We met through a mutual client who needed both graphic design and photography services for a marketing campaign, and we discovered an immediate creative and personal chemistry that made working together feel effortless. What started as a professional collaboration evolved into late-night conversations about art and life, shared meals at food trucks between client meetings, and eventually into a love that felt both comfortable and exciting. Ryan was everything. Caroline's questions about my dating life suggested she thought I couldn't find or keep. He was financially stable, emotionally mature, and genuinely committed to building something lasting with me. He had met my friends and coworkers, integrated into my social circle in Austin, and proven over time that he was serious about our future together. We had survived the challenges that test young relationships, supporting each other through professional setbacks, family stress, and the normal ups and downs of learning to build a life with another person. But Caroline had never really given Ryan a chance to show her who he was or what our relationship meant. During the few times they had met, she was polite but distant, asking superficial questions about his work but never showing genuine interest in getting to know him as a person. She never asked about our shared interests, our future plans, or how he fit into my life in Austin. It was as if she had decided that my relationships were temporary by definition, not worth the investment of getting attached to someone who probably wouldn't be around long term. This pattern of dismissal extended beyond my romantic life to encompass most aspects of my adult identity. Caroline seemed to have frozen me in time as her little sister who needed guidance and protection, unable to see that I had grown into a competent, successful adult who was thriving in my chosen field and personal life. When we talked, she still treated me like the uncertain teenager who had needed her help navigating social situations, rather than recognizing that I had developed my own confidence and capabilities. The bridal shower invitation that arrived in my mailbox 2 months before Caroline's wedding represented the culmination of this growing distance between us. The beautiful, expensive invitation with my name handwritten as an afterthought made it clear that I was being included out of family obligation, rather than genuine desire to celebrate with me. When I called to offer help with planning, Caroline's surprised response confirmed that she hadn't considered me as someone who might have valuable contributions to make to her special day. I spent the weeks leading up to the shower trying to convince myself that Caroline was just stressed about the wedding and didn't mean to exclude me from the planning process. I bought her a gift I knew she would love, took time off work to attend, and drove the long distance to Cedar Falls with genuine excitement about celebrating my sister and hopefully reconnecting with her. I wanted to believe that the shower would be an opportunity for us to recapture some of the closeness we had shared growing up, despite the differences that had emerged in our adult lives. Walking into the shower that Saturday afternoon, I was struck immediately by how transformed our childhood backyard looked. Mom had clearly spared no expense in creating a picture-perfect setting for Caroline's celebration, with professional-level decorations and an elegant atmosphere that rivaled any wedding I had attended. The guest list was carefully curated to include Caroline's sorority sisters, teaching colleagues, and future in-laws, along with family members who had known her since childhood. Everyone seemed to know each other well and fell naturally into conversations filled with shared memories and inside jokes. I recognized most of the faces from various points in Caroline's life, but I quickly realized that I was one of the few people there who had come alone. Most guests had brought their mothers, sisters, or close friends, creating natural conversation groups that made the party feel intimate and connected. As someone who lived 3 hours away and hadn't maintained close relationships with most of Caroline's friends, I found myself floating between conversations without quite belonging to any of them. Caroline looked absolutely radiant in her white sundress and flower crown, every detail of her appearance carefully chosen to create the perfect bridal shower aesthetic. She moved through the party with the kind of social grace that had always come naturally to her, making everyone feel welcomed and appreciated while maintaining her position as the glowing center of attention. When she spotted me across the yard, her introduction to her friends was warm enough on the surface but carried subtle implications that made me feel like an outsider visiting from another world. The way Caroline described me to her guests, calling me her baby sister from the big city and mentioning my computer design stuff, revealed how she had come to see me in relation to her own life. I wasn't Emma, the successful graphic designer who had built a thriving business in a competitive creative market. I wasn't Emma, the adult woman in a serious relationship who was building a meaningful life in Austin. I was Caroline's little sister, who had moved away and was doing something vaguely creative that didn't quite fit into the categories of success that made sense to everyone in Cedar Falls. This dynamic became more apparent as the afternoon progressed, and I watched Caroline interact with her other guests. Each person seemed to have a specific role in Caroline's narrative about her life and her journey to marriage. Her sorority sisters were there to represent her fun college years and the friendships that had shaped her. Her teaching colleagues were there to celebrate her professional success and the career that gave her life stability and purpose. Her future in-laws were there to welcome her into their family and celebrate the love story that everyone could understand and appreciate. I didn't seem to fit into any of these categories in Caroline's mind. I wasn't part of her college experience because I had gone to a different school and lived a different kind of student life. I wasn't part of her professional world because my career was too different from teaching for us to share common ground. I wasn't part of her romantic story because she had never taken the time to understand or appreciate my relationship with Ryan. I was just her sister, present out of obligation, but not really integrated into the celebration of who she had become. The gift opening session crystallized these feelings in ways that were impossible to ignore. Caroline's response to each present revealed the depth of her relationships with different guests and the meaning she attached to their presence in her life. When her sorority sisters gave her gifts, she told stories about their shared experiences and expressed gratitude that went beyond the material objects to encompass years of friendship and support. When her future mother-in-law presented her with a family heirloom, Caroline's emotional response reflected her appreciation for being welcomed into a new family with such generosity and love. When Caroline opened my carefully chosen gift, her response was polite, but notably different in tone and substance. She held up the silk pajama set I had selected specifically because I remembered her mentioning years ago that she wanted beautiful sleepwear for her wedding night. But her comment about it being nice and practical suggested that she either didn't remember that conversation or didn't recognize the thought I had put into choosing something meaningful for her. There was no story attached to my gift, no acknowledgement of our shared history or the relationship that had motivated me to drive 3 hours to celebrate with her. Sitting in that beautifully decorated backyard, surrounded by 30 women who all seemed to understand their place in Caroline's life, while I struggled to find mine, I began to realize that the distance between us had grown much larger than I had been willing to acknowledge. This wasn't just about different life choices or geographic separation. Caroline had actively constructed a narrative about her life that didn't include meaningful space for who I had become as an adult, and the bridal shower was making that exclusion impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The party games that followed the gift opening reinforced this sense of disconnection in ways that were both subtle and profound. During bridal bingo, I found myself guessing at basic facts about Caroline's wedding plans that everyone else seemed to know by heart. The quiz about the bride and groom revealed how much I had missed about Caroline's relationship with Tom and her vision for their future together. What struck me most was not that I didn't know these details, but that Caroline had never thought to share them with me despite our regular phone conversations over the past year. The other women at the shower laughed knowingly at references to shared experiences and inside jokes that highlighted the depth of their connections with Caroline. They told stories about helping her through difficult times, celebrating her achievements, and supporting her throughout her relationship with Tom. As I listened to these conversations, I realized that while I had been focused on building my own life in Austin, Caroline had been building meaningful relationships with people who were present and available in ways that I hadn't been. This realization was both painful and enlightening. On one hand, I felt hurt and excluded by the evidence of how peripheral I had become to Caroline's daily life and major experiences. On the other hand, I began to understand that my own choices about where to live and how to prioritize my time had contributed to this distance in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. I had assumed that our childhood bond would be strong enough to survive any amount of physical distance and different life choices, but I was beginning to see that relationships require ongoing investment and shared experiences to remain vital and meaningful. The conversation that would change everything began during what should have been the lighthearted final activity of the shower. Caroline's future mother-in-law had organized a predictions game where guests were supposed to make playful guesses about Caroline's future, covering topics like how many children she might have and where she and Tom would be living in 10 years. The questions were designed to be fun and celebratory, generating laughter and good-natured teasing while acknowledging everyone's hopes for the bride's happiness. When Caroline decided to turn the spotlight on me, asking the group to make predictions about my future, I initially thought she was trying to include me more fully in the celebration. But the way she framed the question, focusing on when I would finally settle down, revealed assumptions about my life that were both hurtful and completely inaccurate. Her comment about me being 26 and still single, followed by her suggestion that we focus on more realistic predictions like career advancement, made it clear that she had written me off as someone who wasn't capable of achieving the kind of lasting love and partnership that she had found with Tom. The laughter that followed Caroline's comments wasn't entirely comfortable, and I could see that some of the older women in the group were taken aback by her bluntness. But her college friends and sorority sisters seemed to think it was all in good fun, part of the teasing dynamic that often characterizes close relationships. What they didn't understand, and what Caroline seemed to have forgotten, was that there was nothing playful about systematically dismissing someone's capacity for love and happiness, especially when that dismissal was based on complete ignorance about the person's actual life and relationships. That moment of public humiliation became the catalyst for everything that followed. But it was really the culmination of years of small dismissals and subtle undermining that had gradually eroded our relationship. Caroline's words at the bridal shower were just the most explicit expression of attitudes she had been developing and expressing for years. The difference was that this time, she said them in front of 30 witnesses, making it impossible for me to pretend they didn't matter or rationalize them away as sisterly concern. Standing up to respond to Caroline's predictions about my future felt both terrifying and inevitable. My heart was pounding as I found my voice, but I also felt a clarity and determination that surprised me. This wasn't just about defending my relationship with Ryan or correcting Caroline's misconceptions about my romantic life. This was about refusing to accept a narrative about myself that was both untrue and damaging, and about demanding that my own sister see and acknowledge who I actually was, rather than who she had decided I must be. The silence that fell over the backyard when I began to speak was immediate and total. Everyone could sense that something significant was happening, that this had moved beyond playful family teasing into territory that was more serious and potentially explosive. Caroline's expression shifted from confident amusement to uncertainty, and then to something approaching panic as she realized that I wasn't going to laugh off her comments or let them slide the way I had been doing for years. When I told the group that I wasn't single and had been in a committed relationship for nearly 2 years, I could see Caroline processing this information in real time. Her face went through a series of expressions that revealed her genuine surprise at learning details about my life that she should have known all along. The fact that she was learning about the seriousness of my relationship with Ryan in front of 30 strangers at her bridal shower was a testament to how completely she had tuned out of my actual experiences while maintaining the illusion that she knew everything important about my life. My decision to continue speaking, To detail the ways Caroline had dismissed and ignored my relationship with Ryan felt both risky and necessary. I wasn't trying to ruin her special day or create drama for its own sake. I was trying to break through years of willful blindness and force her to confront the reality of how she had been treating me. The backyard remained silent as I spoke, with guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they witnessed what was clearly a long overdue confrontation between sisters who had been operating under very different assumptions about their relationship. Caroline's attempts to minimize the situation and deflect attention from what I was saying only reinforced my determination to be heard. Her suggestion that we have this conversation later in private revealed her assumption that she could control when and how we addressed the problems in our relationship. But there was nothing private about the way she had just humiliated me in front of her guests. And there was nothing private about the years of subtle dismissal and undermining that had led to this moment. Walking away from the bridal shower, that afternoon felt like the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. I didn't storm out in anger or slam doors behind me, but I also didn't pretend that everything was fine or that Caroline's behavior was acceptable. I said my goodbyes to family members with as much grace as I could manage, thanked my mother for hosting such a beautiful party, and left Caroline to deal with the aftermath of our confrontation without my help or participation. The drive back to Austin gave me 3 hours to process what had happened and begin to understand its implications for my relationship with Caroline and my broader connection to my family. I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, drained by the emotional intensity of the confrontation, but also liberated by finally speaking truths I had been avoiding for years. I had stood up for myself and for Ryan in ways that felt both overdue and necessary. But I had also potentially damaged my relationship with my sister just weeks before her wedding. By the time I reached my apartment in Austin, I had begun to feel proud of how I had handled the situation, rather than regretful about creating conflict. Ryan was waiting for me with dinner and genuine interest in hearing about my day, providing the kind of supportive presence that made Caroline's dismissal of our relationship seem even more absurd and hurtful. As I told him about the bridal shower and my confrontation with Caroline, I felt grateful for his steady, loving response, and increasingly confident that I had been right to defend what we had built together. The party games continued after lunch, with an energy that felt forced and awkward following Jessica's toast about Caroline's supposed expertise in matters of the heart. I found myself participating mechanically, going through the motions of celebrating my sister, while internally processing the growing realization that she had constructed an entire identity around being the relationship expert in our family. This wasn't just about her being excited about her own wedding or nervous about her big day. This was about her needing to be the sister who understood love, while I remained cast in the role of the sister who couldn't quite figure it out. During the wedding word association game, where guests had to write down the first word that came to mind when Caroline said various wedding-related terms, I watched her face light up as she read responses that reinforced her image as someone who inspired thoughts of romance, happiness, and perfection. When she said honeymoon, people wrote words like paradise and bliss. When she said marriage, the responses included soulmate and forever. Caroline beamed as she read these responses aloud, clearly delighted by this public affirmation of her romantic success and the fairy tale narrative everyone had bought into about her relationship with Tom. The contrast became even more apparent during the Guess the Love Song game, where Caroline's maid of honor played snippets of romantic songs that supposedly held special meaning for the bride and groom. Caroline would giggle and share the story behind each song, describing romantic dates with Tom or meaningful moments in their relationship that the music commemorated. She talked about their first dance at a college formal, the song that was playing when Tom first told her he loved her, and the ballad that would be their wedding song in just a few weeks. What struck me wasn't the sweetness of these memories, but how Caroline had never once asked me about the soundtrack to my own relationship with Ryan. She had never inquired about our first dance, our favorite songs to listen to together, or the music that made us think of each other. In Caroline's mind, romantic milestones and meaningful moments were things that happened to her, not experiences that her perpetually single little sister could possibly understand or relate to. She had assigned herself the role of the sister, with a love story worth telling, while relegating me to the position of permanent observer rather than participant. The gift opening session that followed revealed another layer of Caroline's systematic dismissal of my adult life and relationships. As she unwrapped present after present, she would hold up each item and tell a story that connected the gift to her relationship with the giver. When her sorority sister Laura gave her a set of wine glasses, Caroline reminisced about their girls' nights in college and how Laura had always been there to listen to her relationship concerns. When her teaching colleague brought her a beautiful serving platter, Caroline talked about the dinner parties she and Tom planned to host and how this gift would be perfect for entertaining their friends. Each gift came with a narrative that positioned the giver as someone who understood Caroline's life, supported her dreams, and contributed meaningfully to her journey toward marriage and domestic happiness. The stories she told revealed the depth of her connections with these women and the ways they had been present for important moments in her relationship with Tom. They had given her advice during rough patches, celebrated her milestones, and now they were being rewarded with public acknowledgement of their importance in her life. When Caroline opened my silk pajama set, her response was so different in tone and substance that several guests seemed to notice the shift. Instead of telling a story about our shared history or expressing gratitude for my presence in her life, she simply held up the pajamas, commented that they were practical, and moved on to the next gift without any personal acknowledgement. The contrast was stark enough that my cousin Janet, who was sitting nearby, gave me a sympathetic look that suggested she had picked up on the dismissive treatment I was receiving. The most painful part wasn't just Caroline's lack of enthusiasm for my gift, but her failure to recognize the thought and care I had put into selecting something special for her. I had chosen those pajamas specifically because I remembered her mentioning years ago that she wanted beautiful sleepwear for her wedding night, something elegant and romantic that would make her feel special during such an important time in her life. The fact that she didn't remember that conversation or didn't connect my gift choice to her own expressed desires revealed how little attention she had been paying to our interactions over the years. As the afternoon progressed, I began to notice how the other guests responded to Caroline's treatment of me. Some of the older women in our extended family seemed uncomfortable with the dynamic they were witnessing, exchanging glances that suggested they recognized something wasn't quite right about the way Caroline was handling her relationship with me. My Aunt Margaret, who had always been fond of both Caroline and me, made several attempts to include me in conversations and ask about my life in Austin, clearly trying to compensate for Caroline's lack of interest in my experiences. The younger guests, primarily Caroline's college friends and sorority sisters, seemed less aware of the underlying tension, probably because they didn't know me well enough to recognize how differently Caroline was treating me compared to everyone else. To them, I was just the bride's sister from out of town, someone peripheral to Caroline's real social circle who didn't warrant the same level of attention or consideration as the people who were genuinely important in her life. This social dynamic reinforced something I had been trying not to acknowledge for years. In Caroline's mind, I had become a supporting character in her life story, rather than a co-protagonist in our shared family narrative. She had the starring role as the successful sister who had figured everything out, while I was relegated to playing the supporting character whose function was to highlight her achievements through contrast. My struggles with relationships made her success with Tom seem more impressive. My unconventional career path made her stable teaching job seem more admirable. My geographic distance from our family made her decision to stay close to home seem more loving and responsible. The pattern became impossible to ignore during the Advice for the Bride activity, where each guest was supposed to write down their best marriage advice for Caroline to read and keep as a memento of her bridal shower. As Caroline read the advice aloud, She would comment on each piece and often share additional insights about why that particular guidance resonated with her. When her married cousins wrote about the importance of communication, Caroline nodded, knowingly, and talked about how she and Tom had already learned to navigate difficult conversations. When her future mother-in-law wrote about maintaining independence within marriage, Caroline agreed enthusiastically and discussed her plans to continue teaching after the wedding. The advice from family members who had known both Caroline and me since childhood was particularly revealing. When our grandmother wrote about the importance of supporting each other's dreams, Caroline read it aloud, but didn't make any connection to how she had been responding to my own dreams and aspirations. When my aunt suggested that the strongest marriages were built on friendship and mutual respect, Caroline agreed wholeheartedly without seeming to consider how those principles might apply to other relationships in her life, including the one with her sister. I realized as I listened to Caroline respond to this marriage advice that she had developed a remarkable ability to hold certain values as theoretical ideals, while completely failing to apply them to her actual relationships. She could talk eloquently about the importance of supporting your partner's goals, but she had spent years undermining my confidence in my own career choices. She could nod in agreement about the value of mutual respect, but she consistently treated my life decisions as inferior to her own. She could praise the virtue of open communication, but she had never actually asked me about my relationship with Ryan or shown genuine interest in understanding my perspective on love and partnership. The cognitive dissonance became even more apparent when Caroline started talking about her philosophy of relationships during a lull in the gift opening. She told the group that she believed the key to a successful relationship was really knowing your partner and accepting them for who they are rather than trying to change them. She talked about how she and Tom had fallen in love with each other's authentic selves and how they had never tried to make each other into different people. As I listened to Caroline expound on these relationship principles, I couldn't help but think about how she had spent years trying to change me, or at least expressing dissatisfaction with who I had chosen to become. She had never accepted my decision to pursue a creative career, consistently suggesting that I needed a more practical backup plan. She had never embraced my choice to live in Austin, regularly commenting on the expense and difficulty of city life. She had never shown enthusiasm for my relationship with Ryan, instead focusing on perceived shortcomings or potential problems. The irony was striking. Caroline could articulate beautiful theories about love and acceptance when it came to her own romantic relationship, but she seemed completely unable to apply those same principles to her relationship with me. In her mind, Tom deserved to be loved and accepted for who he was, but I needed to be criticized and corrected until I made choices that made more sense to her. Tom's dreams and aspirations were worthy of support, but mine were impractical fantasies that required constant reality checks. This double standard extended to how Caroline talked about conflict resolution and forgiveness in relationships. She told the group that she and Tom had learned to fight fair and always work through their differences with respect and compassion. She emphasized the importance of giving your partner the benefit of the doubt and assuming positive intent even during disagreements. She talked about how crucial it was to apologize when you were wrong and to forgive quickly when your partner made mistakes. But Caroline had never applied these conflict resolution skills to our relationship. When we had disagreements about my life choices, she didn't fight fair or show respect for my perspective. She didn't give me the benefit of the doubt or assume positive intent behind my decisions that differed from what she would have chosen. She didn't apologize when her criticism hurt my feelings, and she didn't seem interested in working through our differences with compassion and understanding. The accumulation of these observations throughout the afternoon created a mounting sense of frustration and sadness that I struggled to contain. I was watching my sister demonstrate that she possessed all the emotional intelligence and relationship skills necessary to be a supportive, loving family member, but she was choosing not to apply those skills to her relationship with me. This wasn't about her lacking the capacity for empathy or understanding. This was about her deciding that I didn't deserve the same level of consideration and respect that she automatically extended to her romantic partner. The breaking point began during what should have been the most lighthearted part of the entire shower. Caroline's future mother-in-law had organized a predictions for the future game where guests were supposed to make playful guesses about Caroline's life in the coming years. The questions were designed to be fun and optimistic, covering topics like how many children Caroline and Tom might have, where they would travel on future anniversaries, and what hobbies they might take up together as a married couple. The predictions people made were sweet and celebratory, reflecting their hopes for Caroline's happiness and their confidence in her relationship with Tom. Someone predicted she would have 3 children, all with her artistic talents and Tom's athleticism. Another guest suggested they would renovate an old house together and become known for hosting amazing dinner parties. The predictions were filled with love and optimism, creating exactly the kind of positive energy that should surround a bride, just weeks before her wedding. Caroline was glowing as she listened to these predictions, clearly delighted by this collective vision of her bright future. She would laugh at the funny predictions and tear up at the particularly touching ones, and she made sure to thank each person for their loving thoughts about her life with Tom. The whole activity was meant to be a celebration of possibilities, a way for Caroline's loved ones to express their hopes and dreams for her happiness. That's when Caroline decided to turn the attention to me, suggesting that the group make predictions about my future as well. At first, I thought she was trying to include me more fully in the celebration, sharing the spotlight in a way that would make me feel valued and considered. But the way she framed the activity immediately revealed her true intentions and underlying assumptions about my life. Caroline announced to the group that we should make predictions about when I would finally settle down and find someone, emphasizing the word finally in a way that implied I had been failing at this fundamental life task for an embarrassingly long time. She continued by informing everyone that I was 26 and still single, bouncing from relationship to relationship without ever making anything stick. Her tone was supposedly playful, but the content of her words was deeply dismissive and hurtful. The laughter that followed Caroline's introduction wasn't entirely comfortable, and I could see that some of the guests were taken aback by her bluntness. My Aunt Margaret looked genuinely shocked, and several of the older women shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Caroline's college friends and younger guests seemed to think it was all part of the teasing dynamic that often characterizes family relationships, not recognizing the cruelty embedded in her supposedly lighthearted comments. Caroline then suggested that perhaps we should focus on making more realistic predictions for me, like when I might get my next promotion or buy my first house, because obviously career success was more my speed than romantic success. The implication was clear. I was the sister who could achieve professional milestones, but was fundamentally lacking when it came to love and relationships. In Caroline's narrative, I was destined to be successful but alone, accomplished but unloved, the cautionary tale that made her own romantic happiness seem even more precious and remarkable. The moment Caroline finished speaking, something inside me shifted dramatically. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was certainly anger present. It was more like a sudden clarity, a crystal clear understanding of exactly what had been happening in our relationship for years, and why I could no longer allow it to continue. All the small dismissals, subtle criticisms, and patronizing comments suddenly came into focus as part of a larger pattern of systematic undermining that I had been tolerating for far too long. I stood up from my chair slowly, my heart pounding but my mind completely clear about what I needed to do. The backyard fell silent as everyone recognized that something significant was about to happen, that this had moved beyond playful family teasing into territory that was more serious and potentially explosive. Caroline's confident smile began to fade as she realized that I wasn't going to laugh off her comments or let them slide the way I had been doing for years. Looking directly at Caroline, I told her and the 30 women present that actually, I wasn't single at all. I explained that I had been in a committed, serious relationship with Ryan for nearly 2 years, longer than many marriages last, and certainly long enough to be considered significant by any reasonable standard. The silence in the backyard was complete as I continued, pointing out that Caroline would know this fact about my life if she had ever bothered to ask about my relationship, instead of making assumptions based on her own limited understanding of what my world looked like. Caroline's face went through a series of expressions as she processed this information, clearly surprised to be learning details about my personal life that she should have known all along. Her response revealed everything about how she had been approaching our relationship for years. She stammered that she knew I had a boyfriend, but nothing serious like what Tom and I have, unconsciously reinforcing her assumption that her relationship was the gold standard against which all other romantic connections should be measured. That's when I found my voice completely and began to speak truths that had been building up inside me for years. I asked Caroline how she could possibly know what was serious when she had never once asked me about Ryan beyond basic politeness during his brief visits to Cedar Falls. I told her she didn't know that Ryan and I had been talking about moving in together, that we had already integrated our lives in meaningful ways, that we had attended multiple weddings together and were beginning to envision our own future as a couple. The specifics I shared about my relationship with Ryan seemed to genuinely shock Caroline, who was clearly learning for the first time that I had built something substantial and lasting with someone she had dismissed without ever really getting to know. I told her she didn't know that Ryan had supported me through professional challenges, family stress, and personal growth in ways that demonstrated his commitment to our partnership. I explained that she didn't know about our shared interests, our mutual friends, or the daily intimacies that characterized a relationship between two people who were genuinely building a life together. As I continued speaking, I could see Caroline becoming increasingly uncomfortable, not just with the public nature of our confrontation, but with the realization that she had been operating under completely false assumptions about my life for years. The other guests were shifting in their seats, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something much more significant than typical family drama. This was a long overdue reckoning between sisters who had been living in completely different versions of reality without either of them fully acknowledging the disconnect. I told Caroline that her comments about my inability to make anything stick in relationships revealed how little she actually knew about my romantic history and how unfairly she had been characterizing my experiences with love. I pointed out that she had never asked me about what I had learned from previous relationships, what I was looking for in a partner, or how my relationship with Ryan was different from and better than what I had experienced before. The silence that followed my words was profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of birds in the trees and distant traffic. Caroline's face had gone pale, and she was clearly struggling to formulate a response that would somehow minimize the damage of what I had revealed about her treatment of me. She finally managed to say that this was her bridal shower, and maybe we could have this conversation later in private, but her suggestion only highlighted how inappropriate her original comments had been. I told Caroline that there was nothing private about the way she had just humiliated me in front of 30 people, and there was nothing private about the years of dismissive treatment that had led to this moment. I explained that I was tired of having my life diminished and dismissed, tired of being cast in the role of the sister who couldn't figure out love when the reality was that she had never bothered to understand or appreciate the love I had found. The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Caroline making increasingly desperate attempts to minimize the situation and regain control of her narrative. She tried to suggest that she had always been supportive of my choices, that she was just concerned about my happiness, that I was being too sensitive about what was meant to be playful family teasing. But her explanations only reinforced my points about her pattern of dismissal and her inability to see me as an adult who was capable of making good decisions about my own life. When I finally finished speaking and sat back down, the silence in the backyard was deafening. Some guests were staring at their hands, clearly uncomfortable with having witnessed such a raw family confrontation. Others were looking back and forth between Caroline and me, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant for the remainder of the celebration. Caroline stood frozen for a moment before excusing herself to go inside, presumably to collect herself and figure out how to salvage her special day. The aftermath of our confrontation was awkward and tense, with guests making polite small talk while clearly processing what they had witnessed. Several family members approached me privately to express support or understanding, suggesting that they had noticed Caroline's treatment of me and were glad I had finally spoken up for myself. My Aunt Margaret hugged me tightly and whispered that she was proud of me for standing up for my relationship and my choices. But the damage to Caroline's perfect bridal shower was undeniable, and I knew that my decision to confront her publicly would have lasting consequences for our relationship and potentially for my place in the family. As I prepared to leave early, citing the need to drive back to Austin before dark, I felt simultaneously proud of myself for finally speaking truth and concerned about what I had set in motion by refusing to remain silent any longer. The drive home gave me hours to process what had happened and begin to understand its implications for my relationship with Caroline moving forward. I felt liberated by finally expressing feelings and observations I had been suppressing for years, but I also felt sad about the necessity of such a confrontation and uncertain about whether Caroline would be able to hear and integrate what I had tried to communicate to her. By the time I reached Austin, I had begun to feel confident that I had done the right thing, even if it meant disrupting Caroline's perfect day and potentially complicating our family dynamics. I had refused to accept a narrative about myself that was both untrue and damaging, and I had demanded that my own sister see and acknowledge who I actually was rather than who she had decided I must be. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I wouldn't allow anyone, not even family, to diminish my worth or dismiss my happiness. The drive back to Austin that evening felt like the longest 3 hours of my life, yet also like a journey toward something I had been avoiding for far too long. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, giving me nothing but time to replay every moment of the confrontation with Caroline and process the magnitude of what had just happened. I kept the radio off, needing the silence to sort through the complex emotions swirling inside me. There was relief at finally speaking truths I had been carrying for years, anxiety about the consequences of my public confrontation with Caroline, and a strange sense of lightness that came from no longer pretending everything was fine between us. My phone buzzed repeatedly during the drive with text messages from various family members who had witnessed the scene at the bridal shower. Some were supportive, like my cousin Janet, who wrote that she was proud of me for standing up for myself and that Caroline's behavior had been inappropriate. Others were more concerned about family harmony, like my Aunt Patricia, who suggested that I call Caroline to apologize and try to smooth things over before the wedding. I didn't respond to any of the messages during the drive, needing time to process my own feelings before dealing with everyone else's reactions and opinions. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex in Austin, the sun was setting and casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sat in my car for several minutes after turning off the engine, gathering the emotional energy I would need to explain everything to Ryan and begin processing what this confrontation might mean for my relationship with Caroline moving forward. I felt like I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, finally refusing to accept treatment that I had been tolerating for years out of family loyalty and the desire to keep peace. Ryan was in the kitchen when I walked through the door, stirring something on the stove that smelled like the comfort food I desperately needed after such an emotionally draining day. He took one look at my face and immediately turned off the eye burner, wrapping me in a hug without asking any questions or demanding explanations. In that moment, being held by someone who knew me well enough to recognize when I needed comfort more than conversation, I felt the full contrast between the dismissive treatment I had received from Caroline and the loving support I experienced in my relationship with Ryan. When I was ready to talk, Ryan listened to my account of the bridal shower without interrupting or trying to offer solutions. He didn't minimize my feelings or suggest that I had overreacted to Caroline's behavior. He didn't make excuses for my sister or try to find ways to rationalize her treatment of me. Instead, he simply witnessed my experience and validated my emotional response, confirming that Caroline's public dismissal of our relationship had been inappropriate and hurtful. His reaction reinforced my growing understanding that I deserved to be with someone who respected and valued what we had built together. Over the following weeks, as Caroline's wedding approached, I found myself in a strange emotional space where I felt both proud of standing up for myself and apprehensive about facing my family again so soon after such a public confrontation. Caroline and I had barely spoken since the bridal shower, exchanging only the most basic logistical communications about wedding details and family arrangements. The silence between us felt loaded with unresolved tension and unspoken resentments that I wasn't sure how to address, or whether Caroline even wanted to address. My parents tried to play peacemaker, suggesting that both Caroline and I had said things we regretted, and that family was more important than whatever disagreement had occurred at the bridal shower. But their attempts at mediation revealed that they didn't really understand the depth of the issues between Caroline and me. Seeing our confrontation as a temporary spat rather than a symptom of fundamental problems in our relationship that had been building for years. They wanted us to apologize to each other and move on. But I wasn't ready to pretend that Caroline's pattern of dismissive behavior could be resolved with a simple apology. The week before the wedding, Ryan surprised me by bringing up a conversation we had been avoiding for months about the future of our relationship. He told me that watching Caroline dismiss what we had built together had crystallized his own feelings about wanting to make our commitment official and public. He said that her inability to see the seriousness of our partnership had made him realize how much he wanted to ensure that no one could ever question or diminish what we meant to each other. I sensed that he was building up to something significant, but I didn't want to make assumptions or put pressure on him to move faster than felt natural. Caroline's wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made everyone comment about how blessed the bride was and how everything was falling into place exactly as it should. The ceremony was held at a beautiful historic chapel in Cedar Falls, decorated with white roses and elegant greenery that created exactly the romantic atmosphere Caroline had been dreaming about since childhood. She looked absolutely radiant in her grandmother's vintage wedding dress, which had been altered to fit her perfectly and updated with delicate beading that caught the light as she walked down the aisle. I attended the ceremony with Ryan as my date, and we sat toward the back of the chapel with other extended family members and friends who weren't part of the immediate wedding party. Watching Caroline exchange vows with Tom was genuinely moving, despite the tension that existed between us. She had found someone who clearly adored her and was committed to building a life that would make her happy, and I felt genuinely glad for her, even while still processing my hurt about how she had been treating me. The reception was held at the country club where Caroline and Tom had attended their high school prom, transformed with sophisticated decorations that elevated the familiar space into something magical and elegant. The dinner was delicious. The band was excellent, and the overall atmosphere was festive and celebratory in all the ways that wedding receptions should be. Caroline and Tom looked blissfully happy as they moved through the evening, greeting guests and soaking up all the love and good wishes being directed their way. I found myself actually enjoying the reception more than I had expected, dancing with Ryan and catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in years. The confrontation at the bridal shower felt like ancient history in the context of the wedding celebration, and I began to hope that Caroline and I might be able to find a way to move forward from our conflict without it permanently damaging our relationship. Several family members made comments about how happy I looked with Ryan and how nice it was to see me in such a stable, loving relationship. About halfway through the reception, during a particularly slow and romantic song, Ryan asked me to dance, with an expression that seemed different from his usual easy smile. As we swayed together on the dance floor, surrounded by other couples lost in their own romantic moments, he whispered that he loved me more than he had ever thought possible, and that watching Caroline's wedding had made him think about our own future together. I felt my heart rate accelerate as I recognized the tone in his voice and the intensity in his eyes. Then, in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by Caroline's wedding guests and with the band playing a love song that would forever remind me of this moment, Ryan got down on one knee and pulled out the most beautiful engagement ring I had ever seen. The entire reception seemed to stop and turn to watch as he asked me to marry him with tears in his eyes and complete sincerity in his voice. Through my own tears of joy and shock, I could see Caroline at the head table, her mouth literally hanging open in complete surprise. The proposal was everything I could have dreamed of and more, romantic and public and absolutely perfect in its timing and execution. Ryan had clearly been planning this moment for weeks or even months, choosing to propose at Caroline's wedding reception as a way of proving that our love was real and lasting and worthy of celebration. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present, including Caroline, who was witnessing the very serious relationship she had dismissed being elevated to an engagement in front of all the same people who had heard her predict that I would never find lasting love. After I said yes, and Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, the entire reception erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to go on forever. Even people who didn't know us well seemed genuinely excited about the surprise proposal, and the band immediately launched into another romantic song as Ryan and I continued dancing in our own little bubble of happiness. The other wedding guests gathered around us to offer congratulations and admire my ring, turning what was already a celebratory evening into something even more magical and memorable. Caroline eventually made her way over to congratulate us, but I could tell she was struggling to process what had just happened and what it meant for the narrative she had constructed about my romantic life. She hugged both Ryan and me and said all the right things about being happy for us, but there was a stunned quality to her responses that suggested she was still trying to reconcile this development with her assumptions about my inability to maintain serious relationships. Her new husband, Tom, was much more genuinely enthusiastic, shaking Ryan's hand vigorously and joking about how he had just been upstaged at his own wedding. The rest of the evening took on a surreal quality as guests moved seamlessly between celebrating Caroline and Tom's marriage and congratulating Ryan and me on our engagement. The dance floor remained packed as people celebrated both couples, and the overall energy of the reception seemed to be elevated by the unexpected surprise that had unfolded during what was already a joyful occasion. I felt like I was floating through the evening, still processing the reality of being engaged while also navigating the complex family dynamics that Ryan's public proposal had brought to the surface. Later in the evening, Caroline pulled me aside for a private conversation that I had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. We stepped out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the country club's golf course, away from the music and laughter of the reception. Caroline looked beautiful in her wedding dress, but also vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if the events of the evening had stripped away some of the confident facade she usually maintained. She began by apologizing for her comments at the bridal shower, acknowledging that she had been wrong to dismiss my relationship with Ryan and to make assumptions about my romantic life without taking the time to really understand what I had built with him. She admitted that seeing his proposal had forced her to confront the reality that she had been unfair to both of us, and that she had let her own insecurities about our different life paths affect how she treated me. Her apology felt genuine and heartfelt, though I could tell it was difficult for her to acknowledge how wrong she had been. I accepted Caroline's apology while also being honest about how much her treatment had hurt me and damaged my trust in our relationship. I explained that the bridal shower confrontation hadn't been about one afternoon of inappropriate comments, but about years of feeling dismissed and undervalued by the person who was supposed to know and support me best. I told her that I wanted to rebuild our relationship, but that it would require her to actually engage with who I was as an adult, rather than continuing to see me through the lens of outdated assumptions and comparisons. Our conversation on the balcony lasted for almost an hour, covering years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings that had built up between us as we had grown into different kinds of adults. Caroline acknowledged that she had been threatened, by my independence and success in ways that she hadn't fully recognized or been willing to admit. She confessed that watching me thrive in Austin while building a creative career had challenged her own assumptions about the right way to live, making her defensive about her more traditional choices. I shared with Caroline how isolated I had felt from our family and how much her dismissal of my life choices had contributed to that sense of distance. I explained that I had never been trying to reject the values we were raised with or to prove that my way of living was superior to hers, but that I needed to follow my own path and have that path respected by the people I loved most. I told her that I wanted us to find a way to celebrate each other's successes without feeling like they diminished our own choices. By the time we returned to the reception, Caroline and I had reached an understanding that felt like the beginning of a healthier relationship rather than the resolution of all our issues. We both recognized that rebuilding trust and genuine connection would take time and ongoing effort, but we were both committed to doing the work necessary to become true supporters of each other rather than competitors for family approval or validation. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, and I felt hopeful about our ability to move forward in a more authentic way. The following months brought significant changes to both of our lives as we planned our respective futures and worked to implement the new dynamic we had established between us. Caroline threw herself into married life with Tom, decorating their new house and settling into the routines of being a wife while continuing her teaching career. I began planning my own wedding with Ryan while also navigating the excitement and challenges of expanding my design business and taking on larger, more complex projects. Caroline made genuine efforts to engage with my life in Austin, asking detailed questions about my work projects and showing real interest in my wedding planning process. She offered to help with various aspects of the celebration and made suggestions that reflected actual knowledge of my tastes and preferences rather than assumptions about what I should want. When she met with Ryan and me to discuss her role in our wedding, she was warm and inclusive toward him in ways she had never been before, clearly making an effort to build a real relationship with the man I was going to marry. The transformation in Caroline's attitude toward my relationship with Ryan was perhaps the most significant indicator of how much our confrontation had changed her perspective. She began asking about our shared interests, our future plans, and the daily details of our life together with genuine curiosity rather than skeptical concern. She started including both of us in family plans and communications, treating us as a unit rather than treating Ryan as a temporary appendage to my individual presence in family gatherings. My wedding to Ryan took place 8 months after Caroline's, in a beautiful outdoor ceremony in Austin that reflected our personal style and the life we had built together in the city. Caroline served as my maid of honor, giving a speech that acknowledged both our complicated history and her genuine happiness about my marriage to someone who clearly loved and appreciated me. Her presence in that role felt meaningful and healing, representing the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The experience of planning and celebrating my own wedding while continuing to work through the issues that had emerged at Caroline's bridal shower taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries while maintaining love for family members who don't always understand or support your choices. I learned that it's possible to forgive someone for past hurts while also requiring them to demonstrate genuine change in their behavior moving forward. I discovered that standing up for yourself and your relationships, even when it creates temporary conflict, can ultimately lead to healthier and more authentic connections with the people you care about most. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see that the confrontation at Caroline's bridal shower was a turning point that forced both of us to examine assumptions and patterns that had been limiting our relationship for years. Caroline had to confront her tendency to diminish experiences that differed from her own choices, while I had to learn to advocate for myself and my relationship rather than accepting treatment that made me feel less valued and understood. The process was painful and sometimes messy, but it ultimately led to a stronger and more honest relationship between us. Caroline and I now talk regularly about our respective marriages, careers, and future plans with a level of mutual interest and support that feels genuine and sustainable. She has become someone I can count on for advice and encouragement, while I have learned to appreciate her perspective and wisdom, even when we approach life differently. We have both grown into more confident and secure versions of ourselves, able to celebrate each other's successes without feeling threatened by differences in our choices or circumstances. The lesson I learned through this experience extends far beyond my relationship with Caroline to encompass all the ways we allow other people's opinions and assumptions to shape how we see ourselves and our relationships. I realized that I had been giving Caroline's dismissive attitude toward my romantic life much more power than it deserved, allowing her skepticism to create doubt about my own experiences and feelings. Ryan's proposal at her wedding reception served as a powerful reminder that my relationship was real and valuable, regardless of whether Caroline recognized or appreciated it. For anyone watching who has experienced similar dismissal or undermining from family members about their relationships or life choices, I want you to know that you don't need anyone else's validation to live fully and love deeply. The people who truly care about your happiness will make the effort to understand and support your choices, even when those choices differ from their own preferences or expectations. Those who consistently diminish your experiences or try to convince you that your dreams are unrealistic are revealing more about their own insecurities than about your actual potential for success and fulfillment. The most important thing I learned is that you can love someone deeply while still refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth or dismisses your happiness. Setting boundaries with family members doesn't mean you love them less. It means you love yourself enough to require respect and consideration in your relationships. Sometimes the people closest to us need to see consequences for their behavior before they recognize how much damage they've been causing through their words and attitudes. To everyone who has ever been told they're not capable of finding lasting love or achieving their dreams, especially by family members who should be your biggest supporters, please know that their limitations in understanding your potential don't define what's actually possible for your life. Your story is still being written, and the most beautiful chapters might be the ones that surprise everyone, including yourself. Trust your own experience, value your own happiness, and never let anyone convince you to settle for less than you deserve, especially in the name of keeping family peace. Ryan and I have now been married for over a year, building a life together that feels both stable and exciting, grounded in mutual respect and genuine partnership. Caroline and Tom are also thriving in their marriage, and our families have blended beautifully as we've all learned to appreciate the different ways we've chosen to pursue happiness and fulfillment. The confrontation that once seemed so destructive ultimately opened space for more authentic relationships based on who we actually are rather than who others think we should be. The weeks following the bridal shower confrontation passed in a blur of wedding preparations and family tensions that seemed to hover just beneath the surface of every conversation. Caroline and I maintained an uneasy truce during the final stretch before her wedding, communicating only when absolutely necessary about logistics and family arrangements. Our parents kept trying to facilitate reconciliation between us, suggesting that we both needed to apologize and move past what they characterized as a simple misunderstanding between sisters. But their well-intentioned mediation efforts only highlighted how little they understood about the deeper issues that had been festering in our relationship for years. I threw myself into work during those weeks, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office to avoid dwelling on the complicated emotions surrounding Caroline's upcoming wedding. My colleagues at the marketing agency noticed my increased productivity but also my distracted demeanor, and several of them asked if everything was okay with my family. I found myself reluctant to share the details of what had happened at the bridal shower, partly because I wasn't sure how to explain the complex dynamics without sounding petty or vindictive, and partly because I was still processing my own feelings about the confrontation and its aftermath. Ryan was incredibly supportive during this difficult period, never pressuring me to discuss my feelings about Caroline, but always being available when I needed to talk through my confusion and hurt. He had witnessed enough of Caroline's dismissive behavior toward me over the years to understand why I had finally reached my breaking point, and he validated my frustration without encouraging me to hold on to resentment or anger. His steady presence and unconditional support during such a challenging time reinforced my growing appreciation for the stability and understanding he brought to my life. The night before Caroline's wedding, our extended family gathered for the rehearsal dinner at a charming restaurant in downtown Cedar Falls. The atmosphere was festive and warm, with everyone excited about the upcoming celebration and eager to catch up with relatives they hadn't seen in months. I attended with Ryan as my date, and we sat with my cousins and their partners at a table that felt comfortably removed from the immediate wedding party dynamics. Caroline looked radiant and happy as she moved through the room, graciously accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone present. During the dinner, several family members made toasts to Caroline and Tom, sharing memories and expressing hopes for their future happiness. The speeches were heartfelt and personal, reflecting the genuine affection everyone felt for the couple and their excitement about the marriage. When it came time for family toasts, I felt a moment of panic about whether I would be expected to speak, but Caroline's maid of honor had already prepared remarks on behalf of the wedding party, and no one seemed to expect additional comments from me. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing Caroline from across the room and noticing how confident and settled she seemed in her role as bride-to-be. She was surrounded by people who clearly adored her and supported her choices, and she basked in their attention with the kind of natural grace that had always characterized her social interactions. Watching her in that moment, I felt a complex mixture of emotions that included genuine happiness for her success, lingering hurt about her treatment of me, and a wistful sadness about the distance that had grown between us over the years. The wedding day itself dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that everyone interpreted as a good omen for the marriage. I spent the morning getting ready at my parents' house, taking extra care with my appearance because I knew this would be a day when family dynamics would be under scrutiny, and I wanted to present myself with confidence and dignity. Ryan picked me up in the early afternoon, looking handsome in his navy suit and carrying a small gift bag that he said contained something special for later. The ceremony was held at the historic Methodist church where Caroline and I had both been baptized and confirmed as children. The sanctuary was filled with white roses and elegant greenery, creating an atmosphere of timeless romance that perfectly matched Caroline's vision for her wedding day. She looked absolutely stunning in our grandmother's vintage wedding dress, which had been carefully preserved and altered to fit her perfectly. The ceremony was traditional and moving, with Caroline and Tom exchanging heartfelt vows that brought tears to many guests' eyes. I found myself genuinely emotional during the ceremony, not just because of the beauty of the occasion, but because of the memories it evoked of Caroline and me as children, sitting in those same pews during Sunday services and whispering about our dreams for the future. Despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my sister, and I wanted her to be happy and fulfilled in her marriage. The confrontation at the bridal shower had been necessary, but it didn't diminish my love for her or my hopes for her future. The reception was held at the country club where Caroline and Tom had attended their senior prom, transformed with sophisticated decorations that elevated the familiar space into something elegant and festive. The dinner was delicious, the band was energetic and professional, and the overall atmosphere was exactly what Caroline had been dreaming of for months. She and Tom moved through the evening with obvious joy and excitement, greeting their guests and participating in all the traditional wedding activities with enthusiasm and grace. Ryan and I found ourselves having a wonderful time at the reception, dancing together and socializing with family members we hadn't seen in years. Several relatives commented on how happy I looked and how much they enjoyed getting to know Ryan better, which felt like validation of our relationship in ways that were particularly meaningful given Caroline's previous dismissive attitudes. The evening was unfolding beautifully, and I began to hope that perhaps Caroline and I could find a way to move forward from our recent conflict without permanent damage to our relationship. About halfway through the reception, During a particularly romantic slow song, Ryan asked me to dance with an expression that seemed different from his usual easy smile. As we swayed together on the dance floor, he whispered that he had something important to tell me and that he couldn't wait any longer to share it. My heart began to race as I recognized the nervous excitement in his voice and the intensity in his eyes. He told me that watching Caroline's wedding ceremony had made him think about our own future together and how much he wanted to make our commitment official and public. Then, right there in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by Caroline's wedding guests, and with the band playing a love song that would forever be etched in my memory, Ryan got down on one knee and pulled out the most beautiful engagement ring I had ever seen. The entire reception seemed to freeze and turn to watch as he asked me to marry him with tears in his eyes and complete sincerity in his voice. Through my own tears of shock and joy, I could see Caroline at the head table, her mouth hanging open in complete surprise. The proposal was everything I could have dreamed of and more, romantic and public and absolutely perfect in its timing and execution. Ryan had clearly been planning this moment for weeks, choosing to propose at Caroline's wedding reception as a way of proving that our love was real and lasting and worthy of celebration. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present, including Caroline, who was witnessing the very serious relationship she had dismissed being elevated to an engagement in front of all the same people who had heard her predict that I would never find lasting love. After I said yes and Ryan slipped the ring onto my finger, the entire reception erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to go on forever. Even people who didn't know us well seemed genuinely excited about the surprise proposal, and the band immediately launched into another romantic song as Ryan and I continued dancing in our own bubble of happiness. Wedding guests gathered around us to offer congratulations and admire my ring, turning what was already a celebratory evening into something even more magical and memorable. Caroline eventually made her way over to congratulate us, but I could tell she was struggling to process what had just happened and what it meant for the narrative she had constructed about my romantic life. She hugged both Ryan and me and said all the appropriate things about being happy for us, but there was a stunned quality to her responses that suggested she was still trying to reconcile this development with her assumptions about my inability to maintain serious relationships. Her new husband, Tom, was much more genuinely enthusiastic, shaking Ryan's hand vigorously and joking about how he had just been upstaged at his own wedding reception. The rest of the evening took on a surreal quality as guests seamlessly moved between celebrating Caroline and Tom's marriage and congratulating Ryan and me on our engagement. The dance floor remained packed as people celebrated both couples, and the overall energy of the reception seemed to be elevated by the unexpected surprise that had unfolded during what was already a joyful occasion. I felt like I was floating through the evening, still processing the reality of being engaged while also navigating the complex family dynamics that Ryan's public proposal had brought to the surface. Later in the evening, as the reception was winding down and guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, Caroline approached me for a private conversation that I had been both anticipating and dreading. We stepped out onto a quiet terrace overlooking the country club's gardens, away from the music and laughter of the celebration. Caroline looked beautiful in her wedding dress, but also vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if the events of the evening had stripped away some of the confident facade she usually maintained. She began by apologizing for her comments at the bridal shower, acknowledging that she had been wrong to dismiss my relationship with Ryan and to make assumptions about my romantic life without taking the time to really understand what I had built with him. She admitted that seeing his proposal had forced her to confront the reality that she had been unfair to both of us, and that she had let her own insecurities about our different life paths affect how she treated me. Her apology felt genuine and heartfelt, though I could tell it was difficult for her to acknowledge how wrong she had been about something so fundamental. I accepted Caroline's apology while also being honest about how much her treatment had hurt me and damaged my trust in our relationship. I explained that the bridal shower confrontation hadn't been about one afternoon of inappropriate comments, but about years of feeling dismissed and undervalued by the person who was supposed to know and support me best. I told her that I wanted to rebuild our relationship, but that it would require her to actually engage with who I was as an adult, rather than continuing to see me through the lens of outdated assumptions and unfair comparisons. Our conversation on the terrace lasted for almost an hour, covering years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings that had built up between us as we had grown into different kinds of adults. Caroline acknowledged that she had been threatened by my independence and success in ways that she hadn't fully recognized or been willing to admit. She confessed that watching me thrive in Austin while building a creative career had challenged her own assumptions about the right way to live, making her defensive about her more traditional choices and causing her to diminish my achievements as a way of protecting her own sense of security. I shared with Caroline how isolated I had felt from our family and how much her dismissal of my life choices had contributed to that sense of distance and disconnection. I explained that I had never been trying to reject the values we were raised with or to prove that my way of living was superior to hers, but that I needed to follow my own path and have that path respected by the people I loved most. I told her that I wanted us to find a way to celebrate each other's successes without feeling like they diminished our own choices or threatened our own sense of worth. By the time we returned to the reception, Caroline and I had reached an understanding that felt like the beginning of a healthier relationship rather than the resolution of all our issues. We both recognized that rebuilding trust and genuine connection would take time and ongoing effort, but we were both committed to doing the work necessary to become true supporters of each other rather than competitors for family approval or validation. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary, and I felt cautiously optimistic about our ability to move forward in a more authentic and respectful way. The months that followed brought significant changes to both of our lives as we settled into our new roles as married woman and engaged woman, respectively. Caroline threw herself into married life with Tom, decorating their new house and establishing routines that reflected their shared values and goals. I began planning my own wedding with Ryan, while also navigating the excitement and challenges of expanding my design business and taking on more complex and lucrative projects that reflected my growing reputation in the Austin creative community. Caroline made genuine efforts to engage with my life in Austin, asking detailed questions about my work projects and showing real interest in my wedding planning process. She offered to help with various aspects of the celebration and made suggestions that reflected actual knowledge of my tastes and preferences rather than assumptions about what I should want. When she met with Ryan and me to discuss her role in our wedding, she was warm and inclusive toward him in ways she had never been before, clearly making an effort to build a real relationship with the man I was going to marry. The transformation in Caroline's attitude toward my relationship with Ryan was perhaps the most significant indicator of how much our confrontation had changed her perspective on my life and choices. She began asking about our shared interests, our future plans, and the daily details of our life together with genuine curiosity rather than skeptical concern. She started including both of us in family plans and communications, treating us as a unit rather than treating Ryan as a temporary appendage to my presence in family gatherings. My wedding to Ryan took place 10 months after Caroline's, in a beautiful garden ceremony in Austin that reflected our personal style and the life we had built together in the city. Caroline served as my matron of honor, giving a speech that acknowledged both our complicated history and her genuine happiness about my marriage to someone who clearly loved and appreciated me for who I was. Her presence in that role felt meaningful and healing, representing the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding rather than competition and judgment. The experience of planning and celebrating my own wedding while continuing to work through the issues that had emerged at Caroline's bridal shower taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries while maintaining love for family members who don't always understand or support your choices. I learned that it's possible to forgive someone for past hurts, while also requiring them to demonstrate genuine change in their behavior moving forward. I discovered that standing up for yourself and your relationships, even when it creates temporary conflict, can ultimately lead to healthier and more authentic connections with the people you care about most. Looking back now, 3 years later, I can see that the confrontation at Caroline's bridal shower was a turning point that forced both of us to examine assumptions and patterns that had been limiting our relationship for years. Caroline had to confront her tendency to diminish experiences that differed from her own choices, while I had to learn to advocate for myself and my relationship rather than accepting treatment that made me feel less valued and understood. The process was painful and sometimes messy, but it ultimately led to a stronger and more honest relationship between us that has enriched both of our lives. Caroline and I now talk regularly about our respective marriages, careers, and future plans with a level of mutual interest and support that feels genuine and sustainable. She has become someone I can count on for advice and encouragement, while I have learned to appreciate her perspective and wisdom even when we approach life differently. We have both grown into more confident and secure versions of ourselves, able to celebrate each other's successes without feeling threatened by differences in our choices or circumstances. For anyone who has experienced similar dismissal from family members about their relationships or life choices, I want you to know that you don't need anyone else's validation to live fully and love deeply. Your story is still being written, and the most beautiful chapters might be the ones that surprise everyone, including yourself. Trust your own experience, value your own happiness, and never let anyone convince you to settle for less than you deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.